We are living in a time where the illusion of stability is cracking, not just in nations or governments, but in the hearts of people who once believed they were safe, understood, and protected. And when a nation like Israel, with its rich history, deep trauma, fierce resilience, and unending conflict, begins to falter under the weight of its own contradictions, what we're really witnessing is not just political collapse. We are watching a spiritual reckoning, and this moment calls for something far deeper than debate. It calls for awakening. Israel has lived for decades under a kind of survival spell, an invisible contract passed down through generations that says we don't get to rest. We don't get to feel. We just have to make it. And for many years, that energy, though heavy, also heroic, it birthed courage, it bonded people, it gave purpose to pain. But my love, survival is a short-term strategy. It's not a way to live. It's a trauma response masquerading as a national identity. And right now, we are watching what happens when a whole country runs on that response for too long. Look into the faces of those who've lived through one conflict after another. The mothers who kissed their children goodbye at 18, knowing they were headed for war. The sons who returned with eyes too old and hearts too numb to feel joy anymore. The daughters who became steel to hold families together. There's an entire generation, maybe two, who never got to just be. Just breathe. Just feel love without waiting for the sirens to scream again. And that, my sweet woman, is the first sign of collapse. Not the headlines, not the military movements, but the slow erosion of the human spirit. You see, when we as individuals live in constant hypervigilance, our nervous system burns out. Our joy shrivels. Our intuition goes silent. And the same is true for a nation. A state that never shifts out of defense mode cannot create. It cannot nurture. It cannot love. It becomes a shell, hard on the outside and hollow on the inside. We're seeing that now in Israel. There's a heaviness, not just from the pain of rockets and raids, but from the psychic exhaustion of never, ever being able to rest. And while the world watches for signs of military defeat or political scandal, the real unraveling is emotional, quiet, internal, spiritual. The people are tired, not because they are weak, but because they have carried more than any human should have to carry, because they have had to harden themselves for too long. And you know this, don't you? You know what it's like to keep going, to show up, to armor yourself for the next heartbreak, the next betrayal, the next emergency, until one day you wake up and realize you don't even know who you are anymore beneath the armor. That's what we're seeing now. Israel's exhaustion is not failure. It's not shameful. It's human. It's the beautiful, raw signal that the soul of a people is crying out, there must be another way. And what a powerful place that is. That moment when the strategy no longer works. When the body says, enough. When the people begin to whisper, I want something more than survival. This is where the feminine truth begins to rise. Because collapse isn't always a disaster. Sometimes it's the body finally saying no to numbness. Sometimes it's the spirit refusing to stay stuck in the old pattern. Sometimes collapse is what happens right before a radical return to life. And maybe, just maybe, Israel is on the edge of that return. Not to an old version of itself, but to something wiser, something softer, something more whole. Because when exhaustion becomes undeniable, when a people begin to feel their own pain without distraction, without denial, that is not weakness. That is awakening. And when awakening starts, even the most entrenched systems can begin to shift. And that's why, as we move into what's happening politically, into the erosion of trust and the disillusionment with leadership, I want to remember this. Emotional collapse always precedes structural collapse. The outside breaks because the inside can no longer carry the weight, and in that breaking, something breathtaking is trying to be born. And when we look at what's unfolding inside the very structure of Israel's democracy, what we're really witnessing is something deeper than disagreement over policy or governance. It's the disintegration of trust. And trust, my love, is the sacred thread that holds any relationship together, whether it's between two people or between a nation and its people. Once it begins to fray, nothing built on top of it can truly stand. That's what makes the recent judicial crisis in Israel so significant. At first glance, it might look like politics as usual. a battle between right and left, conservative and progressive, religious and secular. But if you listen closely, if you tune into the emotional frequency beneath the noise, you can hear something far more profound happening. It's the sound of a population that feels betrayed, unheard, and increasingly powerless within its own system. Millions took to the streets when sweeping judicial reforms were proposed. Reforms that would significantly weaken the independence of the Supreme Court. But those protests weren't just about legislation. They were about identity. They were about values. They were about a silent fear that the nation they thought they were building is slipping into something unrecognizable. And when that fear takes root in a population, what begins to collapse is not just legal structures. It's a sense of belonging, a sense of safety, a sense of loss. You know how this feels. You've lived it. That moment when someone you trusted changes the rules without warning. When suddenly the ground beneath your feet feels unstable and you realize the security you counted on was only ever temporary. And it hurts. Deeply, not because you're an RV, but because trust is where your heart opened. Trust is where you softened. And when it's betrayed, your instinct is to harden again, to protect, to pull away. That's what the people of Israel are doing. But instead of pulling away into silence, they're using their voices. They are marching in the streets, not because they've given up, but because they remember what this country was supposed to mean. Because they are reclaiming the right to hold their leaders accountable, to demand transparency, to insist that democracy isn't just a word you say when it's convenient. It's a promise you live by. And here's what's so important. This isn't just a political movement. It's emotional. It's intimate. It's the people saying, we're no longer willing to be passengers in a vehicle we no longer recognize. That is a feminine uprising. That is what it means to come home to your power. When we as women find the courage to speak up in our relationships. When we say, no more gaslighting, no more shifting boundaries, no more being silenced. We're not just creating drama. We're drawing the line where dignity begins. The people of Israel are doing just that. They are collectively drawing a line in the sand and saying, we want to be part of shaping our future, not just surviving someone else's decisions. But here's the deeper truth. Systems that rely on unquestioning obedience don't know what to do with voices that suddenly rise. And so the pushback is strong. The attempts to silence, to minimize, to divide, it's all there, but it's too late. The collective nervous system has already awakened. The contract of silence has already been broken. And once that happens, the energy can never return to what it was. This is the sacred breaking point. Not just for democracy, but for the illusion of control. For the myth that people can be managed without being heard. And so, as the structure wobbles, as faith in leadership erodes, something else is rising, something far more powerful than politics. A population relearning how to lead itself. A people remembering that their power doesn't come from permission, it comes from presence, from purpose, from pain alchemized into action. And just like in love, once a woman finds her voice, the relationship either grows or it breaks. Either way, the truth comes out. What's happening in Israel right now isn't confined to its borders. It's a reflection, a mirror, and in many ways, a warning to the rest of us. This is not just a national crisis, it's a global soul cry. And if you lean in, if you truly allow yourself to feel what's underneath the headlines, you'll realizing this isn't just their story. It's all of ours. Because whether you live in Israel or not, you know the energy of what's playing out. You know what it feels like to armor up every day, to push through life in protection mode, to keep your emotional guard up because somewhere deep down, you've internalized the belief if I let go, if I soften, if I stop fighting, everything will fall apart. And that's what Israel has modeled for decades. A relentless drive to survive, even at the cost of connection, at the cost of intimacy, at the cost of peace. But here's the truth. My love, you cannot build safety out of fear. You cannot build true love in a relationship when you're always scanning for the next betrayal. You cannot build a sustainable future as a nation when your nervous system is locked in a constant state of defense. That's not freedom. That's trauma, and it catches up with you. What we're witnessing now is that very reckoning. A collapse, yes, but not of a military or a government or a people. The collapse is internal, emotional, moral, because the human heart, individually and collectively, cannot thrive in chronic disconnection, and the longer we ignore the cost of staying armored, the louder the collapse becomes. You can feel it around the world, the polarization, the protests, the quiet numbness in people's eyes, the burnout, the fatigue. We're watching a global epidemic of unresolved emotional pain playing out as conflict, division, and moral confusion. And Israel just happens to be the most concentrated mirror of it right now. But this is where it gets powerful, because if it's a mirror, then it's also an opportunity, an invitation, a wake-up call, to ask ourselves, where in my life am I prioritizing protection over connection? Where am I upholding systems, whether in love, family, or work, that keep me safe but also keep me stuck? Where am I using fear to fuel my choices instead of love? Because here's the thing, the masculine model of control, of dominance, of separation, of hyper-rational logic, has run its course. Not because it's wrong or evil, but because it's incomplete. It lacks the softness, the wisdom, the emotional intelligence of the feminine. And when you push away the feminine for long enough, when you dismiss empathy, vulnerability, intuition, and relational truth, what you create is not strength, but imbalance. That's what we're seeing now. And it's not just in politics. It's in how we parent. It's in how we date. It's in how we lead. It's in how we relate to one another across culture, religion, and belief. We've lost the art of holding space for humanity. We've traded nuance for certainty. We've confused safety with control. But the feminine knows a deeper truth. She knows that real safety isn't found in walls or weapons. It's found in presence, in attunement, in the courage to stay open even when it hurts. So when we look at Israel and see a nation spinning from crisis to crisis, we must also look within. Because this isn't just about borders or policies. It's about the inner architecture of the human condition, and every breakdown we see, what there, is asking us to begin the breakthrough in here. And now, more than ever, the next generation, the new wave of souls rising, is beginning to feel that. They're not asking, how do we win? They're asking something far more powerful. They're asking, what are we even winning for? And that question, my love, is where transformation begins. Because the moment a generation stops blindly inheriting the pain, the fear, and the programming of the ones who came before it, then the cycle finally has a chance to break. We are witnessing that in Israel right now. This isn't just a political uprising. It's a soul level shedding. The youth are no longer satisfied with repeating the same mantras of survival, defense, and loyalty without questioning the emotional cost. They're looking around at the rubble. Emotional, relational, societal. And they're saying, we want more than this. And it's not rebellion, it's remembrance. They are remembering what it means to feel, to dream, to imagine a future that doesn't run on inherited trauma. And it's stunning, isn't it, to witness what happens when an entire generation decides to pause the automatic pattern and ask, wait, is this mine to carry? That's not just cultural awakening, it's deep emotional intelligence. It's inner child work, but at a national scale. They are grieving publicly what their parents could only grieve silently. They are feeling the heartbreak of occupation, of division, of militarized identity. And instead of pushing it down like past generations had to, they're expressing it. They're marching. They're making art. They're making noise. They're saying, this pain cannot continue unchecked. And that is sacred. That is healing. That is what happens when a wound finally gets light and air. Now, not everyone knows what to do with this energy. Because when you've built an identity around always being strong, always being right, always being the one who must survive, then the softening can feel like a threat. The older generation may look at these brave young hearts and see naivety, but what they're actually seeing is courage. The courage to step out of the trance of trauma and into something real. And yes, that can be messy. Growth always is. When you start feeling what's been unfelt for generations, you shake the foundation. Because now it's not about winning the argument. It's about healing the nervous system of an entire people, and that doesn't happen in a courtroom. It happens in the body. It happens in the heart. It happens in the kitchen table conversations where someone finally says, I don't believe what you believe it, but I still love you. This generation is reclaiming the right to see both nuance and humanity, to acknowledge pain on all sides, to refuse the binary thinking that says you're either with us or against us. They're making space for complexity, for contradiction, for empathy that transcends identity, and that kind of emotional maturity. That's not collapse. That's rebirth. Because here's the truth no one really tells you. When you're raised in trauma, peace feels unfamiliar. It feels unsafe. But when you begin to normalize peace inside of you, you stop craving chows outside of you. You stop needing enemies to define your worth. And that's what these young voices are starting to teach not just their nation, but the world. They are unlearning the need to constantly prove themselves. They're letting go of the addiction to being right. They're reaching for something softer, something more whole. And they're willing to be misunderstood in the process because they know what's at stake. Not just policy, not just power, but the emotional future of a people. And as they rise, they're bringing the feminine principle with them, not in gender, but in energy, in the capacity to feel it all, to hold grief and hope in the same breath, to allow a system to fall apart so something truer can take its place. Because they know, deep in their bones, that before any true healing can happen, something old has to be released. And this is the part so many people miss. Because when we see a system cracking, when we see confusion and chaos and deep emotional unrest, the first instinct is to panic, to judge, to say it's a collapse, a crisis, a disaster. But those of us who've walked through the fires of transformation, who have broken down in our own lives, in our own relationships, in our own identities, we know the truth. Sometimes the breakdown has to come before the breakthrough. This is the feminine wisdom the world has forgotten. The masculine wants control, wants certainty, wants a straight line from problem to solution. But the feminine knows that growth isn't linear, that before we arrive somewhere new, we often have to sit in the mess of what's no longer working. The feminine isn't afraid of the dark, of the HE, of the unraveling. She honors it. She says, yes, let it fall. Let what is no longer real be stripped away. And that's what's happening in Israel. The old stories are crumbling. The myths of invincibility. The illusion that power without empathy will hold. The belief that if you just stay strong enough, numb enough, loud enough, you'll be safe. But safety that's built on suppression is not safety at all. It's a ticking clock. And now that clock is ringing. We can't forget. Collapse doesn't mean the end. It can mean the first honest breath in years. It can mean the moment someone finally stops pretending. It can mean the instant a woman falls to her knees, sobbing, because she can't carry the weight of the performance anymore, and in that moment, something real finally emerges. Something tender. Something whole. Israel, right now, is on its knees. And that's not shameful. It's sacred. Because the collapse of false strength is the first step toward real strength. Not the kind that intimidates or defends, but the kind that listens. The kind that holds space for pain. The kind that's rooted in truth, not trauma. We've been taught that if something breaks, it's broken. That if a system falls apart, it failed. But what if falling apart is exactly what healing looks like? What if the structure has to fall so the heart can rise? That's the feminine truth. That's the deeper wisdom we're being called to remember. That the greatest transformations in life don't happen when we hold it together. They happen when we finally let it fall apart. With grace, with surrender, with trust. And I want you to feel that in your own life too. Think about all the moments when everything seemed to fall apart. The job loss, the breakup, the betrayal, the loneliness. Those weren't punishments. They were invitations. Invitations to come home to yourself, to stop performing, to finally ask, what do I need? Who am I without the roles, the rules, the armor? That's the question Israel is asking now. That's the invitation on the table. For its people, and for all of us watching from the outside, can we allow the old to die with dignity so something more aligned can be born? Can we let go of needing to appear strong and instead be actually strong? Emotionally, spiritually, relationally. Because true strength is born in the ruins. It rises in the quiet after the chaos. It comes not from domination, but from deep presence. This is not the end. This is the the threshold where a wounded masculine paradigm is giving way to a more integrated, more whole, more human future. And we know from every personal transformation we've ever lived through that before you can rise full of you must let the old version of you fall. And so here we are, standing at the edge of something unknown. The old is crumbling. The center feels like it cannot hold. And in that space, it's so easy to believe that hope is gone, that the light is gone out, that the dream has died. But that's only because we've been taught to fear the dark. We've been taught to mistake silence for emptiness and breakdown for failure. But my love, the feminine knows better. She knows that hope doesn't die in the dark. It gets rewritten there. Hope isn't the Narva belief that everything will be okay. It's not a slogan or a political promise. It's a deep, grounded knowing that even when things fall apart, something wiser can rise in its place. Hope is the moment you stop pretending, stop running, stop fixing, and finally start feeling. And when a people, a culture, a nation finally allows itself to feel, that's when the real work begins. Look at what's unfolding in Israel through this lens. The chose, the heartbreak, the confusion. It's not proof that everything's lost. It's proof that something real is finally being faced. That the emotional bypassing, the historical reenactments, the generations of spiritual dissociation are no longer sustainable. Because you can't outrun your own heart forever. You can't repress pain and expect peace. You can't silence grief and still hear truth. This isn't the destruction of a country. It's the exposure of all the places that were never truly whole to begin with. And that's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to honor. Because only when we stop pretending that everything is fine, only when we drop the mask of invulnerability, can we begin to build something with integrity. I want you to really let this ing. We are watching not the collapse of hope, but the labor of a new consciousness being born. One contraction at a time. One protest at a time. One broken illusion at a time. And just like labor, it's raw. It's bloody. It's sacred. No one said birth would be painless, but it is necessary and it is beautiful. So don't turn your eyes away from the mess. Don't rush to the solution before the grief has been honored. Stay with it. Feel the H. Let your heart break open, not shut down, because this moment demands a different kind of strength. Not the strength to push through, but the strength to stay present, to hold complexity, to honor both the rage and the longing, both the fear and the love, both the past and the possibility, the people of Israel, and truly all of us around the world who are watching this unfold, are being asked to do something incredibly brave to mourn and hope at the same time. To admit what's not working without giving up on what could still be born. That's the feminine path, the path of emotional maturity, the path of healing not through force, but through honesty, surrender, and radical compassion. And we can't forget it, in every relationship, there comes a moment where the truth surfaces. And it changes everything. That moment doesn't mean the love is gone. It means the illusions have lifted. And once the illusions fall, there's a sacred choice to be made. Will we rebuild from fear or from truth? Will we stay numb or will we finally let ourselves feel enough to rise? Hope is still here. Not in the way we once knew it. Not wrapped in perfection or certainty. But in the raw, real breathless way that comes after the storm. The kind of hope that doesn't ask you to ignore the pain, but to walk through it. To hold someone's hand in the middle of the rubble and say, I don't know how we'll do this, but I believe something beautiful can still grow here. So yes, the collapse has begun. Not of a country, but of illusions, of systems that no longer work, of wounds that were never allowed to heal, of a belief that power alone will protect us. But within that collapse is incredible beauty, because when we finally allow ourselves to fall, we also make room to be caught by truth, by compassion, by one another. And in that sacred fall, my darling, is where the real rebuilding begins.